And so to get us started, we have three excellent panelists who are here to kind of talk about the power of resilience in communities, elevating our intersectionality, and how we can plan for more intentional spaces. So thank you all for joining. To kind of get us started, so Latina communities are vibrant, creative, and resilient, but are often marginalized by systemic processes and prejudice that impact their involvement. Our community is rich with artists and activists, creative individuals that are lending their voices and speaking to these issues that impact their neighborhoods. So this panel is about how we can learn from these professionals all over the country that actively engage and activate queer and queer Latina communities, emphasizing their work, their stories, and their challenges of building power in our communities.
I just wanted to do a quick introduction of some of the panelists we have today. We are joined by two very special guests today. We have Pastor Megan D. Elliot, who is a pastor at the Spirit of Joy Lutheran Church in Seguin, Texas. She received a Bachelor of Social Work from Malone University in Canton, Ohio in 2004, and her Master of Divinity degree from Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio in 2009. Sorry, this is very long. I don't know if Pastor Megan, you want to wave just so people can see your face. And then we also have the pleasure of being joined by Mr. James Castañeda, who is a planning manager for Somos Group. They're heavily involved in APA California, from being the section director to now being the vice president in administration. And James is currently celebrating 21 years in the planning field. So hopefully we see that FAICP. Matt, do you want to start with the first question for everyone in the group?
Yeah, absolutely. So please provide a brief overview of the work you do and the mission of your organization.
Okay. So I am the pastor at Spirit of Joy Lutheran Church in Seguin, Texas. And we are a rather smallish, medium-sized congregation in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And we are also an open and affirming church, or what we call in our tradition Reconciling in Christ, or RIC, which means that we welcome people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, gender expressions, and make sure that they are loved and celebrated for who they are, not just tolerated within the space, but also lifted up as, being cherished for who they are. So we are, at this point, a predominantly white congregation, and we live in a predominantly Latino neighborhood. We purchased a building about 3 or 4 years ago, that used to be a school. And so we exist in that space and are going to be doing some work to transform about half of our church space and renovate it into community space, so making it into a community center. We are just at the very beginning stages of that. But we are actively working to try to do the work of anti-racism and providing welcome for the LGBTQ community and anybody. I mean, anybody is welcome in our space, but we want to specifically make sure that those folks know that that we are trying hard to do this work.
Thank you, Pastor Megan. And then James, do you want to answer those same questions for us?
Sure. Thanks, Daisy, and thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, so I'm a planning manager at Somos Group. As Daisy indicated, we are a small but mighty firm that just started up about 2 years ago, and coincidentally started on the foundation of our Latino and queer CEO, who wanted to get back into the community and kind of provide back towards disadvantaged communities and really kind of focusing on that type of work. So a lot of the work that we do is a lot of land use consulting. So most of our focus tends to be a little bit more on the affordable housing, nonprofit resilience building. So we've been trying to get into a lot of different spaces, but the intersectionality to that is really kind of the core of doing meaningful work within disadvantaged communities. So one of the reasons I wanted to get involved with that is because it really felt really engaging with a lot of things I feel passionate about. And so that kind of really spoke to the core and ethos of what I want to get involved with my work in urban planning. So it's a little bit of what we do.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. So kind of this is how it's going to go. We have specific questions that we wrote out for both of y'all, and then we'll just go one by one. And then at the end, we'll have some exit questions for y'all, if that's okay with you. But we'll start with Pastor Megan. The church describes themselves on the website as spirit-led worship and to do the work of radical hospitality, racial equity, justice, and service. Was there pushback with this specific use of language, and how did you educate the community on what it means to do this work?
You know, we didn't really get specific pushback on this language, and here's probably why. We just recently updated the language of our welcome statement. So being an open and affirming congregation and having that, what we call the RIC status, you have to have a welcome statement, and it has to include certain things to be considered one of those safe places. So we just recently did the work to update our statement to reflect some of the updated language that they are including. And so I'm glad that we got this question, because we literally just did this work like maybe 8 months ago. And I think we're a unique congregation in that we only formed about 15 years ago, and formed out of a congregation that was leaving the ELCA over the ELCA's vote to allow LGBTQ folks to be clergy, to be partnered and be clergy. Let me be clear that you could be celibate before that, but that was the line you had to draw. There was a local congregation that ended up leaving, and my folks who formed Spirit of Joy, I wasn't there yet, but they did not want to leave. And so they formed this new community and this new church, and have been kind of laying the foundation and the groundwork for that from the very beginning. So this was very clearly part of their mission in their inception. But it's fascinating to me because the only way that it could become part of their mission and their inception is that they had to leave their church and start a new church, because these conversations can be really contentious and a struggle. And that's not to say that we don't have really hard conversations within the community, or that when we sent out the language for our new statement, there were a lot of questions, there was a lot of feedback. We also recently put a sign on our building that is the pride flag in a heart that says "All are welcome," which feels like a pretty bold statement to make in Seguin, Texas. For those not super familiar with our demographics, we are a very conservative small city in Texas. We are surrounded by more progressive urban cities, but we ourselves are not one of those. So it's just a lot of dialogue, it's a lot of back and forth, and there is sometimes pushback, but people don't join our church and then push back on that language, because they join our church knowing that that's who we are, that's our identity. And if you want to be a part of this congregation, you got to be on board with this. So from the beginning, and that, I think, creates a level of safety, and it also allows people to explore and ask questions within that framework of knowing that we are an open and accepting place. And now, some of my folks who are in their 60s and 70s who are like, so talk to me about this pronoun thing. And so we get to have those conversations, and they get to kind of wrestle with it in real time, but they know that our community is a safe place to ask those questions and have them answered in a loving way, and to kind of journey with people on their own growth.
Pastor Megan, thank you so much for bringing that up. Do you have any advice, or essentially how you started creating these safe spaces where people can ask these questions? Because I can imagine people are coming in and they go, I look this way. Is it appropriate to ask this? Is this the right place? Is this the right time? How do you create those spaces? Because I know that's something that in the planning field, it's hard to have those hard conversations.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a lot of trust building. It's a lot of trust building because, so I've been there 9 years, and my folks know that like they can come to me with questions, and I am hopefully going to receive them in a non-judgmental manner and be open to them and loving towards them and kind of journey with them in their growth and not, but it took us a long time to get there. Also, I have the advantage of getting their attention for 15 to 20 minutes every week in my sermon. Like their job is just to sit there and listen to me for that time. And so I get to preach and to share with them what I believe and what I'm thinking about certain how our stories of faith relate to the world around us and the things that are happening in the world around us. And I think because of that, people have a clear sense of who I am. And so we're able to build that kind of trust, build on it, have those kinds of conversations. We had a lot of those conversations too when we were moving into our space, when we were even looking at it. The school that we were in was when Seguin was segregated, it was designated as the Mexican school. So, and it sat empty for 10 years. The school district finally decided to sell it. And so when we were purchasing that, we had lots of conversations of, we are a primarily Anglo congregation. Do we have any right to purchase this space? Do we, how are we going to inhabit it when and if we do? How are we going to be good neighbors to our neighbors and not come in with this like white savior complex of, let us save you, but rather let us be companions with you and neighbors with you. And those are still ongoing conversations that we're having. But I think people knew moving into that space that we were going to start those conversations and continue them, and that expectation was kind of set.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is for James. So you said that Somos was kind of founded on this values-based ethos, right? Kind of based in that intersectionality. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how, that ethos and those values really translate into practice, and to how your firm works and interacts with your clients in the community.
Sure. And so just to kind of expand a little bit further on that, yeah, I mean, a lot of our clients too also tend to be in other communities and everything. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of a continuation of some of my public sector work where my projects kind of vary throughout. But what's been interesting in working with this group and having the background that, most of us, or let me back up, I have a step here. We're minority owned. So all our partners are of color, women, and so and that kind of expands a little bit further with our staff. So what's interesting to me is that we all come in with the lens of our past experiences and lending our own practices. So in a lot of ways, we kind of align on a lot of our practices. For me, it was bringing in a lot of that visibility and just trust building for historically absent communities and inclusive engagement. And so, during my time in working in public sector, a lot of times we just didn't have always the resources or the ability or the support for that matter for doing those really kind of granular and inclusive type of engagements that really took a look at who it is that we're talking to in the community. That also got away from the cookie cutter, one size fits all. What I really appreciated that as I got further into my profession and started to switch to different firms and such is being able to have more of a voice to influence who we're talking to and spending that extra time and figuring out who are the people that the community trusts. What are the demographics and doing all that really basic intel. And so what's interesting to me is that, I had done it from a standpoint of inclusivity, but it actually was coming from a lot from my own experiences growing up in, rural New Mexico and feeling like there was not a lot of those spaces to have those types of, hey, this is my opinion on how my community should be formed. And so fast forward, it's been really refreshing to start working with like-minded individuals and a firm that does believe in that. Now, not all the times it goes perfectly that way, it's always going to be a constant learning situation when it comes to engagement. But at the same time, being welcome to, if we really want to have a successful project and an outcome for whether it be the nonprofit that we have, this commercial developers trying to build housing, or whatever the case may be, like part of the equation in trying to be successful to that is being able to provide the space for that, for those engagements, for those conversations and building that trust. And that's something I can go on and on about. And I don't know, I'll say that for any additional questions in that. But that's where I felt like it was a good match for me as I've kind of been evolving my career. Rewind maybe 15 years ago, it would have been a little bit different because as like a counter planner who was working some variants or some or rather, or Matt, you'll appreciate this. I worked for Maricopa County as my first job. I was doing variances as they were building the Loop 202 freeway out past Mesa. And there was just not a lot of conversations for folks who say, hey, wait, why am I having my properties being cut up? At any rate, it's just even some of those just having that awareness that where's that space for that conversation, right? So anyways, so yeah, I don't know, that's how it kind of all sort of evolved to, and it's been kind of an exciting progression in what does not feel like 21 years Daisy, I'll tell you that much right now.
No, that's great. And I didn't realize that local connection to Arizona. That's so cool.
Yep. It was my first job as a baby planner, Maricopa County. Lived there for 2.5 years, and yeah, it
Nice.
was an experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, that's great. And kind of, I think building off of that, like, what are practices that you've had to implement or create to really work for those marginalized groups and to kind of build that trust?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and thankfully I saved a little bit of those for this one. I don't know. The big thing for me, again, going all the way back to the beginning, is kind of humanizing this process. Like I'm a pretty huge planning nerd. I will go and read theory, and like I got head down in it. But I remember having that first moment when I had to tell my dad, "Hey, can we take out the second loan so I could finish school? Because I want to be a city planner." I was like, "What the heck is that?" From that moment, it was always trying to really, what's the elevator pitch to this? Why is this a relevant profession? And we still have to do that today, like constantly, constantly. But it was always from that process, from that moment, I felt like I have to try to humanize this. I have to try to explain why this is important, why this profession is passionate, not just to me, but all of us. And so as I've gone further and further, working the public counter and working in engagement and different scenarios is trying to say, yeah, well, this is the zoning, you have setbacks and all this, but here's why. Like in case of a fire, like we want to make sure your house is protected and we want to make sure that you have that space and all that. Or, something more complex. Yes, it's a community plan because we want to ensure the community is reflecting what your views and what your future is for your family and how we change that. That's why that's important. That's why. So I think humanizing has been always the biggest thing that is trying to make this profession and what we do and what we do for the communities relevant. Um, some other ones, I would say active listening. I know that thankfully APA is starting to lean into this a little bit more. It seems kind of obvious, but at the same time, like planners, we kind of play part therapists at times too. And a lot of that has to be part of that active listening and being able to acknowledge what they say. You know, I know that the state of civil discourse at the moment isn't the greatest when it comes to, our public meetings and hearings and such like that. But in some ways, it's still maintaining that spirit of active listening and being able to give that opportunity to have those, you know, moments where people can have those engagements. Um, and there's so many other different ones, but those are usually the biggest ones that I feel underline everything else we put forward. I know that last year Latinos in Planning had the effort putting together the engagement guide, where there was a lot of great ideas in there, a lot of storytelling activities and all those things. And so I think those are all great, but I think the foundation is just the active listening and the humanizing of the process and being able to have those. So I felt like those have always been useful in setting the context to any type of engagement that I've been in or been trying to influence with the work at our firm or even back in my public sector days, and being to say, okay, let's make this relevant to why it's important to this individual who's upset that their neighbor's cutting down their tree and it's half in their property. So even going down to that level, there you can be successful with that process.
Sorry, I'm still like trying to process that. I'm like, yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, I feel like I have my biggest wins at work when I can help someone that has been saving their whole life to zone their property and, build their house all over again. Like, I feel like those are one of my biggest wins when I feel like I make a human connection with people. Um, so James, this is for you. How have you used your personal experiences to make you a better planner?
Uh, I'm gonna piggyback on the humanizing part. And I want to say it's probably the empathy part of things. So, for example, like you were just saying, like the biggest wins tend to be those small moments where it's like, I got them to understand like this ridiculous bureaucratic process and all these things that they may say back. But it's like, no, there's a rhyme and reason to this. I'm going to help you through this. And here's how we're going to get through that. And even right now, I have a client, and some of our work is not in the what you would immediately feel like is in like the warm and fuzzy, we're building housing stuff. I'm actually helping one client who has a commercial operation in an industrial area, and they want to be able to expand events like they want to have a wedding and a quinceañera and all this other things, but they want to go through the process, but the city, because it's not allowed in the M2 zoning as live events and this, that, and the other. I'm trying to walk him through it, and then he's now being asked to put a pedestrian and parking analysis plan. And again, it's just like, I just want to have quinceañeras. It's also like, all right, I'll be the in-between here and be the empathy part to it, and just saying, hey, listen, the city's not telling you no. It's a liability issue. They don't want to be sued. You don't want to be sued. It's an industrial area, you have incomplete sidewalks. Like, this is why this is important. And then this is going back to the city, having that conversation, saying, hey, this is what he's just trying to do, understand to benefit the community, this, that, and the other. Just that approach alone, I feel like has been like really helpful. And again, that goes back to, hearing these stories I would hear from folks at the public counter who, again, to like your point, Daisy, would come in and say, hey, we saved to just put this extra back unit because Abuela needs to come live with us now. But like, gosh, what is all this? And it's like, okay, I gotcha. Here's why this is this, that, and the other. I can't change the rules on how we process this, but I can change my approach on how I have like that understanding and empathy. Because if I rewind back to when I was a kid, yeah, those are probably the challenges my parents had to do. And I always tell this funny story that, like, as a kid, my dad built this really big carport that eventually was going to morph into like our new house, this, that, and the other. And I always go back, I'm like, he didn't get any permits for that, did he? So with some sense of irony, here I am as a planner and saying you need to get permits for all these things, right? But I can only imagine the intimidation and all that process that goes into that. So again, it's with that sense of like just being empathetic, because in outside of our day to day, sure, we're like, gosh, this is my house, and the biggest thing that I feel like I have the most amount of personal investment in. How dare somebody tell me I can't have that, or I can't do this, or I can't do that? And then you flip it to the other way around, like, well, no, the whole reason that we have some of these rules and regulations is because we're trying to protect them. We're trying to help them, trying to do that. So I think empathy is the one thing that I've felt like has been a asset in which I carry, and it's something that I continue to promote in a lot of ways. And again, it doesn't solve everything, but it does kind of go a long way for us to reach a lot of these, underserved communities and send it both ways. Because that helps with my storytelling when I'm in front of the city council trying to explain why said, person is trying to go through this process, and also kind of frame in such a way like, yeah, that could be you too, right? So it works in that both scenarios and that both directions. So it's kind of the empathy part of it that I always kind of really hold on to.
Thank you, James. And on the topic of empathy and humanizing, I know, Pastor Megan, you have a very infamous book club where you discuss some books on the topic of religion. Can you speak a little more about that book club, how you create a space where people can, discuss these really tough topics in a really human environment with empathy? And how do you get these people in a small town of Seguin to read these books and have open discussion?
Um, before I dive into that, I did want to mention at some point that every pastor, not every pastor, lots of pastors have backup plans. Like if you just can't take it anymore, what do you want to do? And my plan B has always been, I would love to be a city planner. So I am really excited to be here and part of this conversation. Um, yeah, so we just did a study on a book called America's Unholy Ghosts: The Racist Roots of Our Faith and Politics. And it's by Joel Edward Goza. And he really goes all the way back to not just the foundations of our country, but the philosophical foundations that our government was structured on, and the way that impacted our economic system, our government, our religious system. And so it's a heavy topic because it's asking people to examine not just the systems that they have around them, but to question things that they would have just absorbed internally without ever realizing it. And so it's really trying to peel back those layers and examine that. For example, one of the things that he talks about is the idea that our economic system was built on this idea. Well, capitalism is built on this idea of the invisible hand, and so the invisible hand says that you can be pulled up through the economic system if you just put enough effort into it, and so the religious implications of that are that if your neighbor is struggling and unable to help themselves economically, then they are doing something wrong. And religiously, you have no moral or ethical responsibility to try to help them. You can still consider yourself to be a good person and ignore their suffering. And which goes all the way, like a couple hundred years back to philosophical systems that we built our whole foundations on. So yeah, to have discussions about that, it's really, really hard because it asks you to examine things that you just believe in without ever questioning or thinking about. And I think the way that we do it is we do it in community. We do it with people that we know and trust and love. And we do it with people who are willing to, I kind of led the study, and then I wasn't really part of any of the small groups, but I listened. I would kind of float around the room and listen to what they were discussing, and their willingness to challenge each other, to pull each other out, to ask good questions, to re-examine things, stories from their own lives, was really heartening. And so I think you can't do this work, you can't do it in a vacuum. You have to have community, you have to have people who are willing to journey with you into it, and people that you can trust. And we had most of the folks who came to that book study were white. We had some people of color who also were there. And so I would kind of check in with them after each study and be like, just checking in with you. Like, I overheard some of the conversation. How are you? How are you processing this? Do you need to talk more about it? Do you need me to have conversations with anybody? And just letting them know that like I'm in their corner as well. So yeah, they liked it. So it was a video series based on a book. They liked it so much that we are going to be diving into the book this fall. And then he is releasing another book on reparations. And so I think we're going to pick that one up after that. But yeah, I think it's an acknowledgement that we're in this together. It's setting an environment and an expectation that we will be honest. And then before we start every study, I will say something along the lines of, you're going to hear information in here that you're immediately going to push back on internally. And I want you to just take a deep breath. And instead of immediately pushing back, allow it to permeate a little bit and see what that has to give you, what wisdom you can glean from that, what kind of thing you can take from it. And maybe it's something that you still push back on in the end, but before you do that, allow it to do its work on you. And I think you kind of have to set that tone of, nobody is here angry at you, nobody is here yelling at you, nobody is here like telling you that you're a bad person, but we are inviting you to grow and to learn and to gain some new insights. And then, you know, the struggle then is that people are like, well, what do we do about it? And I'm like, we keep learning and we keep growing and we keep our eyes opened to the community around us. And one thing that we discovered, so we were doing this work and we were talking about reaching out to our city council representative that our church is in, and they just did some redistricting in the city. So I knew who our old city council representative was. I didn't know who our new one was. So we pulled up the map, and that's when I realized that our neighborhood, that our representative at our physical location at our church was different than the rest of our neighborhood, and that our neighborhood, which is the most economically challenged neighborhood in the entire city, had 5 different representatives representing it. It was carved up into that many pieces. So there's no collective voice in that neighborhood anymore. It is just a corner of 5 different representatives' districts. And whether or not I would like to give people the benefit of the doubt and say that that was just an oversight. But regardless, it strips that entire neighborhood of having any voice in the city council because they don't have a person who can advocate for them. They are sort of the afterthought of all 5 of those council people's districts. So just realizing things like that, coming to and discovering that together and being like, wow, this is a problem. We need to do something about this. Because if there's road problems on the road that we're located on and the city is ignoring it, there are 5 different representatives that represent that road. So who's gonna speak up and do something about it? So it's just a lot of continuing to build trust, continuing to build community, because I don't think you can have those conversations without those foundations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that really gets back to, that statement you said earlier about journeying with people through this process. And I think there's just so much power that comes from that safe and intentional community to really unpack and deconstruct some of those conversations. So, I think as we kind of move forward, we'll have a few, well, maybe one exit question, and then we'll open it up to other audience members here who may have some questions as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat while we wrap up this last question. But this is for the both of you. How can we as planners partner with you to plan for more inclusive spaces, and how can we ultimately support the work that you're doing?
I think as we're a congregation that is very community driven, and not just our own community, like our own church community, but also our wider community in which we find ourselves. And we're looking to do the work of intentional listening and building relationships with our neighbors and forming a community center out of part of our space. And what we really don't want to do, so I've had the opportunity to go to Honduras a couple of times, and all over Honduras, when you drive through the countryside, there are basketball courts everywhere, everywhere. And I can't remember which company it was. It might have been Dole. It might have been one of the fruit companies in the United States that basically destroyed all of the soil in Honduras and then just abandoned it, was like, oh, we feel kind of bad about that. Let's give back to the country. And so they put basketball courts everywhere, all over. I mean, just everywhere. Nobody in Honduras plays basketball. So you see all of these kids out there on these basketball courts kicking soccer balls because that's what everybody plays. So they didn't ask the question, what do these communities want or need? They just decided that this is what they needed, and now they're useless aside from being a soccer pitch. So we don't want to come in with that attitude of like, we know best and we know what this community needs. We want to be able to listen. And I think, none of us in our congregation are city planners. We do have folks who have nonprofit experience and experience building organizations. But I think just working with churches, organizations who want to do this kind of work, helping us to better understand our own demographics that we live in, our own neighborhoods that we live in. Because I feel like there is information out there, there are resources out there that we necessarily don't have the connection to. And so building those connections, building those relationships. We also understand that our renovation project that we're going to take on, we've already sunk $2 million into our property, and we've renovated 2 out of 5 buildings. So we've got 3 more buildings to go. We have maxed out our financial for what our church members are able to contribute. So we also recognize that in forming this 501c3 and building a community center space, that we're going to need to resource a lot of that from the community, from business leaders, from government grants, from and which is why we're forming a 501c3, so we can have access to funding streams that churches don't necessarily get. So I think just the ways that we helping organizations like ours better connect with our communities, better understand our communities, and better learn ways that we can be partners with our communities. I think we live so often in these silos where you all have this expertise of information and it's very specific, and I have expertise of information and it's very specific, and we don't ever come together and say, how can our 2 areas of expertise feed one another and help each other? And so I think the way forward together is to build those kind of connections.
So beautiful, Pastor Megan. James, do you want to go ahead and answer these last two?
Yeah. Megan, you literally just scratched off two of my list here, so taking the lead on that. No, I'll piggyback on some of that. My picks is building coalitions across movements and advocating for that, I think is where some help could be involved. In the sense that like, either queer and or Latine communities, they exist at the intersection of all these things that we see in everyday life. So housing justice, climate resiliency, public health, all of these like really just kind of intersect in these areas, because both of these communities um, are probably the ones lower on the rung to experience such. And so that's something that kind of does come across to me, that like we don't always have to reinvent the wheel, because there are a lot of people who have different parts of this, not just us planners, even though we are multidisciplinary in so many different ways. But there's a lot of other coalitions that we can connect with that are beyond just a CBO or any of these other organizations. And so I think Megan like points out some good opportunities there that they're looking for the individual to partner with. That's that's an easy one. And I think that trying to advocate for those cross platforms and coalition building really speaks highly. And that also kind of goes to the next one that I was thinking, which is advocating to normalize this intersectional thinking, because again, you know, planning can sometimes think in these silos on race, gender, housing, climate, queerness, all these things that we're like, yes, we're going to focus on these things, but like, well, to the point I was just saying, it's all in that intersection, it's all in that same conversation. One feeds to the other and reacts to the other one in the same way. So I think that that's something that we want to start doing, and that even expands further beyond just the two the affinity groups that we're discussing as part of the focus of this conversation. That goes into so much other work that we do as planners that could even make us even more successful at that. um, Supporting capacity and leadership pipelines was something else I wrote down. And I think I've seen a lot of that, particularly with the Latinos in Planning group. And I've seen it, evolve over the years in terms of bringing in newer voices and bringing in their viewpoints. And that continues to support the overall mission of the organization within our communities. And so really kind of advocating, professional development, fellowship, staff roles, elevating, queer and Latine leadership in both, organizations, community groups, our planning firms, our agencies, all these things. Because I can tell you again, for not to keep reminding myself of how many years I've been doing this, but I've seen that progress, and it's actually really, really interesting to see that. And for planners, that's hard, because even right down to working on a community plan, it's the long game. You don't appreciate the work that you've done until like, oh my God, that tree that's on that side street, that was on that plan. That's years down the way. And so the same thing in terms of our profession and our communities is advocating for that leadership pipeline and being able to provide those opportunities and provide the environment to nurture those future voices, and encouraging them to continue forward with their visions, with their passion, and being part of organizations like this, giving back to the community, or getting involved further in their professions to keep changing and keep going to different opportunities that really embraces and validates what they do. So um so yeah, I think those are some of the things that really, planners, Latinos in planning, all these different organizations could use some help on in an advocating role.
Thank you so much for those insights. I think collectively between the two, there's a lot of work to be done in continuous coalition building and really fostering that greater, opportunities for humanizing the experience and building those bridges across, the full spectrum of viewpoints. So thank you both for that. We'll open it up to questions from the audience, and I think we have one in the chat from Kiana. she is asking, what advice do you have for community engagement in queer communities where people are increasingly afraid to be identified as queer due to the political climate? And how can planners who want to build out more queer cultural infrastructure in cities do so when there may be cultural pushback?
I'm not a city planner, despite my hopes and dreams, but I do own, not own, but I serve in a building that has a giant pride flag out on a metal sign out on the building. And so when we were discussing putting that up, we had lots and lots of conversations of this is going to be very visible and very public. So it's going to let people know that this is a safe congregation, but is it also going to put a target on the queer folks who are attending our church? And are we going to create uh, a dangerous situation within by trying to create a safe situation? And it seems like such a precarious balancing act these days. We're in Texas where open carry is a thing. And so, by putting that sign on our building, are we inviting an active shooter to show up some Sunday morning and target folks? And um, we went back and forth and back and forth and just decided that like we had to be visually open about it, about being welcoming and about drawing people in. And I think when I look around, if my town also, put out a rainbow for June, the month of June, like I would feel so much safer having that on my building. I feel like there is strength in numbers, there is strength in community. The more people who can be visually, openly affirming, I think the more safe spaces that we can create. And I think in this climate, so many agencies, organizations, companies are pulling back from their open support. And I think that can feel very scary. And I think it goes back to the same thing that we've been talking about building coalitions and about being open in the more spheres that we can be accepting in, the less culturally acceptable it is to show up at a school board meeting shouting about pornography in a book that simply identifies queer people as a reality. So I think that visibility is so important, even when people are increasingly afraid to be identified as queer. And I do think that there is strength in numbers. I myself identify as queer and have I'm also a solo mom by choice. So I had a kid on my own, and I am so hyper aware of every space I walk into my town, of not wanting my kid to be ostracized, not wanting my identity to affect whose parents are willing to let their kids play with my kid. And so I'm always trying to do the calculation, the equation in my head, every space I walk into. How much do I share? Do I share that I'm a pastor? Do I share that I'm queer? Do I share that my church is open and affirming? My city council representative in our town posts things on X, formerly known as Twitter, about how affirming churches are demonically infiltrated. And this is my city council representative in my town. So I carry a lot of anxiety, but I do think that when I'm around other people and in community where it is clear that that I am accepted, that my folks are accepted, I think that builds strength. So I think just continuing to be visibly supportive and not pulling back when there's pushback, because that is our first, our first instinct as humans is to protect our institutions and to protect ourselves. And we have to kind of push back against our own hesitation.
This is a tough question that I almost want to do a phone a friend to our friend James Rojas, who does a lot or has written a bit about queer urbanism, because there is that topic of work. There's some discussions and some other literature on it. Only to say you kind of know when you feel it, in a sense, in that it is a welcoming space. It is a space where you don't have to sort of code switch yourself in a way. And my background on it actually comes from two different extremes. So, growing up in southern New Mexico as a young gay man, like all I had was like a couple of nightclubs in downtown El Paso. It was like 45 minutes away. And that was where I got to be gay. Like you got to be around other people, you felt safe. But you go a block off of that and okay, that's it. And so to Megan's point, like had I seen a little bit more, visibility of others and not felt like I was maybe just like one of a handful, that at that, I'm pretty sure there was several other people in the queer community, but in the same boat where it's like, I don't see a pride flag. I don't see something else that gives me that indication to be, in that space. Now, fast forward, I've had the ability to live in San Francisco for a good 14 years, which a hop, skip, and a jump to the Castro. Complete opposite different scenario. And so in that one, you didn't have to question anything. You felt like you immediately could be with your partner, holding hands and whatnot. And before I moved to Northeast LA, I was living in West Hollywood, so it was like a continuation of that. And so it's interesting because when this question has come up, it's like, well, what can we replicate from that? And it's not, you can't just go transplant that to some small town in Texas, right? But at the same time, like you go to other countries, in my travels, in Stockholm, Copenhagen, those places, immediately my mind is fixated in this American way where I need to go find, like, where is the neighborhood? Well, we don't really have that much of a neighborhood, but the flip to it is we're all good, right? Like you get three gays in a gay bar or in a bar, and that's now your new gay bar. So it is a tricky balancing act and everything, but I have to like really echo Megan's thought that it is space, but it's also just that visibility that you're not necessarily, on your own, that you have some allies, you have that like, oh, thank goodness. Because yes, in the face of everyday, life, and again, rewinding 25 years prior, I don't want to say the rhetoric was as polarizing as it is today, despite the fact that you probably already like we've gotten a lot further in that. But that was just coming out of the Matthew Shepard incident, and so yeah, it was not, it wasn't exactly as welcoming, and it was a very scary time to come out. Um, so, but again, having those spaces to be able to have that visibility to know, like, oh gosh, even if I don't have just somebody that I can go talk to and stuff, at least there's people here, right? And so yeah, there's a ton more of literature in terms of like what queer communities and spaces mean that goes into more granular part. But I think for the purposes of like our discussion today, like uh, it really is kind of that what Megan was talking about. I think it starts with the visibility. After that, then we can start talking the physical infrastructure to that, because without the first part, then you can build the most beautiful, most inclusive park that encourages those types of dialogue. But if you just don't have that visibility, then
I do want to thank our two speakers so much for coming on and being able to share their experiences, share their stories. I know, Pastor Megan, you're probably super busy. I know, James, you're doing so much and you probably have 10 meetings after this. But but thank you so much for being a part of this. I think it's really important to have these conversations, and especially in a time when people are scared or people are being told not to have these conversations. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this, and thank you everyone for joining and listening. This was recorded, so LAP will have it. Email us if you want any of the contact information for Pastor Megan and even for James. If you want to contact them, hire them, help them out in any way, just let us know. We can give that to you. So thank you so much for joining on today.
Thank you for inviting me. It was an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Dave. JC, thank you, Matthew. Megan, it was a pleasure to be discussing this with you today. So
Same.
wonderful.